Hey, I'm Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about all the expansions we've ever made and the one regret that I have for each of them. I try not to hold regrets for the decisions that we made. I am proud of the playtesting and oversight process that we put into our games and expansions. But a while ago, I did a video about, in retrospect, looking back at our games, if there were one change that I could make about those games, what would I change looking back? Typically, it isn't something big enough that I would actually change it. Otherwise, I probably would have in a reprint. But they're little things that I think about over time in trying to improve the decisions that we make for future products. So I decided to do the same thing today about expansions. And before I did, I asked ambassadors what their thoughts on expansions. This was specifically in reference to a specific game that we are looking to make an expansion for. But in general, I think this is a sentiment that I hear from ambassadors a lot. And also at the end of this video, or in the video description, if you're curious about the topic of expansions, I have more information from other videos, including the top regrets from our games video. That's about our games. I have a video that rates all of our expansions at Stonemaier Games. I think that was a few years old. And then I have my video about my top 14 non-Stonemaier expansions, where I go down a list of each type of expansion category and talk about my favorites in those categories, also from a few years ago. So anyway, Stonemaier ambassadors say that they most want out of expansions three things. They want new stuff and new options. They want more variety, so more stuff, and they want asymmetry or increased asymmetry in the game. Ambassadors least want the following. They least want, and this might be game to game, but they least want an increased player count. So they're generally happy with the player count of the original game. They generally do not want campaign expansions, and they generally do not want a faster playtime, which is interesting because I often think about that with expansions. I'm like, okay, this game is going on a little bit longer than I wanted it to. Is there a way to speed it up a little bit? But maybe that's just personal preference. It is not reflected by Stonemaier ambassadors. So on my other screen here, in largely the order, I believe this is the order that we released these games. Yeah. But not the order in which we release these expansions, just because that'll be a little chaotic if we do it that way. I'm going to talk about the expansions for each of our games. So we'll start with basically Viticulture and then Euphoria and so on. So with Viticulture, we have several expansions now. And the first one was the Tuscany. Well, it was Tuscany. Relevant today is Tuscany Essential Edition. So this is what this expansion is all about. This is an expansion that is a more stuff and more variety expansion. Largely more variety style of expansion, where it adds an extended board that expands the actions that you can take in Viticulture. It adds structure cards. It adds new special workers that you can add to the game. And trying to think about my regret for this game might be twofold. I might have two small regrets. And one of them isn't really a regret, but I found that I rarely actually play with the special workers. I know you might play that differently, but they add just too much complexity to the game for my personal taste. I like that they exist. I like the idea of meeples that do different things than other meeples, but I generally don't add the special workers in the games. And maybe the one actual regret, but I don't mind it being in the game because other people do use it. My one possible regret for this expansion has to do with this map down here. I really like the look of the map. I like that it gives players access to more resources. Basically, there's an action that says put a star on the map, add some influence to the map. Right away, you get a benefit associated with that region. So you might get a coin, you might get a card. And then at the end of the game, if you have, you'll compare your stars on that section of the map to all other players. And if you have the most stars of any player there, then you gain some extra victory points. So add some endgame victory points, which Viticulture is lacking. The system overall, I think, is a pretty good system, but I found that people don't seem to like it at 2 players in particular, because it becomes like once I put even a single star in a territory, it is a huge detractor for having the opponent also put a star there, because even though they can get that instant benefit, they probably aren't going to get that endgame benefit. And then they're also taking that endgame benefit away from me, which, that can work for certain 2-player games, but I've just found that most people don't like to play to 2 players. So maybe I would try to tweak something about the map to make it a little bit more 2-player friendly. Next up, I don't want to spend I have a lot of expansions to get through today, so I don't want to spend too long on each expansion. The next up is Viticulture Moor Visitors. So this is purely a more stuff expansion. I worked on a lot of visitors to add to the game, and I do want to emphasize, I almost said that I designed these visitors. I did not. Famed designer Uwe Rosenberg designed the visitors for this game, and honestly, I think he did a fantastic job with them. I went through and tried to make sure they were consistent with the language and balance of viticulture, but they fit in seamlessly with the game. I think the one thing that maybe I would have done slightly differently is that a lot of these cards and more visitors give you different ways to earn points in the game, but they don't necessarily improve your engine building in viticulture. A little bit they do. I mean, they definitely do, but they also have points on these cards. And you can even see it in this graphic. I see as I look around here, I can see the point icon on so many different cards. And I think one of the common complaints about viticulture is that you can ignore at least partially the winemaking process and just focus on getting visitor cards that give you points. I think that is a viable strategy. If you're running a vineyard, that is fine to have people come into your vineyard and you're serving those people, and you're making them happy and increasing your reputation. I think that is fine. But thematically, I do like when viticulture encourages players to actually go through the winemaking process. So that is maybe the one slight thing about more visitors that I have a slight regret. But overall, I like that that is out there as an option. But that brings us to Visit from the Rhine Valley, which is an expansion largely created by our partner, Forland, our German partner. Here's an image of what these look like. Yeah, here's an English image. And while these are largely not about victory points at all, these are largely about the winemaking process and improving your ability to go through the winemaking process. And I think a lot of people like this expansion for that reason. I think so. My one maybe slight regret with this expansion is that Forland believed strongly that these cards should have a different back than the normal cards that you find in viticulture, because they believe strongly that if you are playing with these visitor cards, that you should not play with the original visitor cards. Like, if the idea is that you want more focus on engine building in the visitors and less of an ability to gain points from the visitors, that if you shuffle them all in, it's possible that a player could draw a bunch of the original point-driven visitor cards, and some other player could draw the engine-building visitor cards, and it would allow that one player to still, not completely, but largely ignore the winemaking strategy. I still wrestle with this today. There's a random card draw in viticulture. I don't mind that the card draw is random, as long as cards are relevant for different times throughout the game and different strategies and different tactics. Sometimes you use cards at different moments, even if you weren't planning to use a visitor at a specific moment. So I am still a little torn with that, and to the point where sometimes I tell people, hey, if you're okay with having cards of different backs, they're the same shape of card, same size of card, just shuffle them all together, play with all the visitors. That's totally fine. Or have two different decks of visitor cards and let players draw from one deck or another deck. But that is maybe my one regret, that I didn't push back a little bit more about that. But I do see the intent. I see the purpose behind it. The last expansion here is Viticulture World. Viticulture World is a cooperative expansion for viticulture where you are working together with other players. And I definitely have, I have a few, I think this is a really cool achievement, but there are definitely some things that I maybe wish that I'd push back with a little bit more about this expansion. Really, I have three things that I struggle with a little bit about it. One is that it introduces a new worker system to the game, where you have workers that can only be placed in the summer and workers that can only be placed in the winter. And you can upgrade these workers so they can be placed at any time throughout the year. It's a cool idea. It's a really neat idea, but it does require you to learn a different system than the system that's in viticulture. And it is which is fine. But one of the best decisions that you make in viticulture, one of the most interesting decisions is, do I use a worker now in the summer, or do I hold it and use that worker for the winter? Because you can only use one worker, each worker once per year. So it removes a key decision space from viticulture. Two is the difficulty of the game. Viticulture World is a very difficult game. And this is another way that I probably should have been more aware of this and maybe pushed back a little bit more, because I was somewhat aware, but I don't think I was as aware as I should have been. Because the designers of the game, I was not a designer of Viticulture World. I think the designers did a fantastic job, but they played it so much that what is an easy game for them is very difficult, I think, for most other people. This is, if you like difficult cooperative games, Viticulture World is a game for you. It is very, very difficult to win the game. Even in the starting scenario, which is meant to be the introductory scenario, is very difficult. And so nearly at the last minute, I added another scenario that is like the real starting scenario. You can get it from our web store. That is meant to be even easier. You can even still lose that scenario, but it is meant to be a lot easier to give players a better first experience with Viticulture World. But I wish we had taken that difficulty into consideration a little bit more, and at least maybe included that scenario in the core game as a better, much easier starting scenario for the game, and a way to walk players into the game a little bit easier. The last thing has to do with something that we included in the game that we shouldn't have included. We included some conquistadors in the game, in referencing their impact on the winemaking aspect in the Americas. And it's just one of those elements of history where we could have acknowledged it in writing and just said, hey, but we are not going to include them in the game, even though we acknowledge that they had an impact on the winemaking and the vineyards and winemaking in the Americas, that it is not worth putting them in the game, because not because they're worth forgetting in history, but because by highlighting them in the game, we're elevating them, and there's no reason at all to elevate a conquistador, a person who pillaged and killed and did terrible things to huge numbers of people. So it's something that we tried our best to identify with cultural consulting, and we did get a little bit of feedback. But the feedback from the cultural consultant was, hey, just don't make them look good. And we didn't make them look good, but we still, by putting them in the game, by having their presence in the game, we are still ended up elevating them. Anyway, that is a big topic, but that is one thing that I wish I had pushed back more on, and really taking the responsibility myself to say, these guys should not be in the game. All right, that's Viticulture World. Let's move on to Euphoria. Euphoria, Ignorance is Bliss. This is a really cool expansion that adds a solo mode. It adds a variety of new market tiles. It adds new recruit tiles. It adds a bizarre, so it addresses a lot of things, a lot of problems with viticulture, or not with viticulture, with Euphoria, that I wish I had applied to the original game. The number one thing that I regret a little bit about this, though, is that Ignorance is Bliss. In the rules, it says you cannot combine the market tiles and the new recruits in this game with the original markets and recruits. And it's something that I still talk about with Morton to this day, because Morton was the designer, the lead designer for this expansion. Because I think one of the great things about an expansion is just being able to shuffle everything together and play with it all from then on. And I think Morton has very valid reasons for not doing that, reasons to do with balance. But I don't think that the new markets are all that differently balanced in comparison to the original markets to justify not allowing them to be shuffled together. So it's something that we still discuss, and I think it is something that you could certainly house rule and shuffle them together anyway. But it is something that I wish I had maybe push back a little bit more, and I do regret that. You can see that I'm using this term push back with a little bit more, because a lot of these expansions, I designed some of the expansions for our games, but some of them are designed by other designers, whether the original game was my game or not. And so I have to decide how much do I trust the designer's decisions here, and how much do I push back for what I think is maybe the right decision for the people who are actually going to be playing it. Between Two Cities Capitals. This is now a core part of Between Two Cities Essential Edition, but it was at one time a separate expansion. And like, my favorite part about this expansion are these grids that you're now building on, that really add a lot of color and flavor and a little touch of asymmetry to the expansions. The expansion does get a little complicated with the districts. The districts add a puzzle for all players to pursue in terms of different valuing different types of buildings in the game. And while it isn't a strong regret, I found when I was working on Between Two Cities Essential Edition, I realized that the one thing that I did not think was essential to that experience were the districts. They added some advanced play to the game that takes you a little bit away from the joy, and not the joy, but the puzzle of building your own city and cities. You're building one city to the left, one city to the right. And so I don't know if I don't know if this is a case where I should have pushed back and said to the designers, "Hey, I don't think this needs to be in the game at all." But I think maybe it we could have referenced it a little bit more as a separate module um, to add in if you are ready for advanced play rather than a core part of the experience of the expansion. And now that we have the essential expansion or essential edition, we can say, hey, the civic buildings, they're just shuffled in. You always play with the play mats, and the districts, they're optional. They're up to you. They're in advanced mode if you want to play them. Let's get the Scythe. The Scythe has lots of content, and I'm not going to go over all the content in Scythe because some of it I don't consider expansion content. The encounters and the modular board, they are kind of essentially expansions, but I classify them as accessories. So the first expansion for Scythe was Invaders from Afar. So Invaders from Afar adds two new factions, not three, and two new player mats. It does expand the player count, but I say in the rulebook, hey, I don't necessarily recommend playing Scythe with 6 or 7. And in hindsight, this is one of my regrets for it. I think if I am ever to take a game that plays well up to 5 and say, here's content that you could play with 6 or 7 players, but I don't recommend it, that maybe I add, like we did in the Wingspan flock mode, maybe I add a rule that makes 6 or 7 play a little bit faster. So that's one regret. The other regret is that I really struggle to consistently remember the difference between the flags in the game, which are placed by Albion, the green faction, and the traps that are placed by Togawa, the purple faction. Traps for me are a little bit easier to remember, especially in terms of their end game mechanisms, but flags for some reason are a little bit harder to remember. There's an ability that lets you jump to a flag, and flags, I believe, are only worth, they only give you, they add to the value of the territory at the end of the game if you also control that territory. But just having two tokens that are so different from one another in the game, I think is good for asymmetric design, but I wish I had made some parts of those tokens act the same, particularly for endgame territory control and scoring. I think that would have made them maybe a little bit easier to remember. That's maybe my one other regret from Invaders from Afar. Inside the Wind Gambit, where's a good photo of the Wind Gambit? Here's one. So I guess the main thing in the Wind Gambit is that you have these dramatically large airships, and the airships, you share an ability. All airships share the same abilities. They're two different abilities. One is related to player interaction. One is related to engine building. Overall, I really like the design of the airships. This expansion also comes with resolution tiles, new ways to end the game, which I don't think are actually used all that often, but I think I really actually like that part of the expansion, that it gives you new ways to end the game for people who don't like perhaps how abruptly Scythe can feel like it ends sometime. I think the one thing that I want to change about this expansion, though, because we've sold a lot of copies of this expansion. At the time, it felt like we had a pretty tight budget for what we could create. And we spent a lot of time creating one version of these airships designed so that they wouldn't topple over when you put workers on them, workers or resources on them. They can either carry resources or workers depending on the abilities. And so by the time we even got one of them to work well, I was like, okay, this one works. Let's make this version of the airship. And they weren't cheap to make. They are very big. They each require an expensive mold. However, looking back and given how many copies of this expansion we've sold at this point and seeing what fans have created to give each faction their own flavor of airship, I wish that we had maybe created a different version of each airship catered towards that specific faction. I think that would have been really cool. I'm glad there are some fan versions out there now where you can 3D print some really innovative, beautiful looking airships. But yeah, that is a regret for me from a product design perspective. And last, we have Scythe, the Rise of Fenris. I mentioned earlier that ambassadors generally said that that they don't want campaign expansions. But this is one of the top-rated expansions of all time for any game. So I think it has gone over really well in terms of how we being me and Ryan, created this expansion. It's full of surprises. It's not a legacy expansion, so you can completely reset it and play it again. If people have played this campaign multiple times, it's a shorter campaign, so you're not spending 20 games on it. I believe it's 8 games. And you have huge consequences in terms of the decisions that you make in this game. I think the one thing that I would change about it is that it is incredibly common for people to open the expansion and open up these boxes. And oddly enough, they seem to open some boxes, but not others. And I don't, this is a level of human psychology that I still don't fully understand. But there's a box in here in the Rise of Fenris that you can open. And when you open it, you will look at it and you will think, I am missing a component. And we get so many replacement parts requests for people who have opened that one box and then gone immediately to the replacement parts form and said, I'm missing this component. So they've spoiled something, but they haven't opened the other boxes, which that's an element I don't understand. If you're opening one box, why haven't you opened the other boxes to see if that missing component is there? Because, spoiler, that component is there. It's just in a different box. I've never understood this. Maybe you can help me understand it, but there must be, I do have some sort of regret here for not understanding that better and maybe communicating that differently in the game. But we even put it in like right when you open the game, there's a thing on the rules that says don't open any of these boxes until the game tells you to open them. So something that I don't quite understand about it, but I think I have some sort of regret there because we've gotten so many replacement parts requests about that one component. Let's jump to My Little Scythe, Pie in the Sky. And I definitely have a regret in this game because I made a mistake in it that we are still fixing to this day, I think. I think finally with a reprint we fixed it. But in this expansion, and I don't think I have a good photo of it, I did not include several core components in the game. I'm not seeing them here in the photos, but basically each player has a few tokens. Let's see if we can find them here. Each player needs a few specific player tokens. I believe it's a pawn and it's a heart and another component that goes on a track. And they didn't make it onto the component list as we were designing the game. And so when I used that component list to ask Panda our manufacturer to put to make these components, I used that component list, and the component list repeatedly, it never got these basic components for these added factions to the game. They never had it added to the component list. So when I used that component list to ask Panda to make the components for the expansion, they didn't make these components because I didn't ask them to make them. So these core components for these new factions were not added to the expansion, and we had to make them afterwards and include them separately. It's caused a huge logistical hassle for us and for retailers and for distributors. Entirely my fault for missing it, and it is a huge regret that I did this. I am baffled that I made that mistake in this expansion, but it does speak to the importance of getting that component right list early and never assuming at any level, if you are a designer, a proofreader, anyone else, never assuming that someone else is going to do that for you. So if something is missing, add it in there and ask why it isn't there. That is a good question to ask at any stage in the project. Next up, we have Between Two Castles, the Secrets and Soirees expansion, which now, like Between Two Cities, is now built into the Between Two Castles Essential Edition. This expansion adds, let's see if we have a good photo of it. It adds secret rooms, which I love. It adds these kind of hallways that look at abilities for adjacent tiles, and it adds a bunch of other little tokens and bits that expand what this expansion does. I'm trying to think if I really have much of a regret from this expansion at all. I don't know if I do. I think this expansion came together really, really well. It seamlessly integrates with the core game. It does add another player, but adding an 8th player in Between Two Castles doesn't actually add to the playing time. I don't know. I may be struggling to think of a regret that I have for this expansion. So, and part of it, I think, is because the experience is so streamlined in terms of how well it just combines with the core expansion. Perhaps, if anything, I'm struggling a little bit to remember exactly how these tokens work, these tokens right here. But I think it's pretty clear in the rules how they do. So I don't know. If I think of one, I'll add one in the comments, but I cannot think off the top of my head and I'm thinking even when we combined this with the core game for the Essential Edition, if we took anything out or changed anything, we really didn't have to change much. It was definitely a puzzle to combine the rule books, but we didn't have to change much at all that I can recall. So yeah, that fell short on that one. Wingspan European expansion. Here is the European expansion. Actually, that's the German version. Let's look at the English version. Yeah, here's the English version of the expansion. So this is largely a more stuff expansion for Wingspan. It mostly just adds more cards, and it adds one new ability, one new type of ability to the game, the round end abilities, which I really like. They're powerful abilities, but they only trigger at the end of each round. You only get 4 rounds in Wingspan, so you have to decide when to play them. We add a new tray to it. We add the eggs, a bunch of new birds, new bonus cards. It's really, I mean, this is oftentimes what I want from an expansion for a game that I already love. I just want more stuff in that expansion. Is there any type of bird in this expansion? I'm trying to think if there's anything here that I struggled with, as a player. I don't know. I'm going to fall short a little bit here again because it includes just a little bit more of everything, including the goal tiles, which are not pictured here that I can see. They're under the tray over here. Overall, I maybe nowadays we and this actually I'll say this because it kind of sets a precedent. We set a precedent for this line of expansions by putting it in a full 2-piece box, whereas you can easily fit these components in the core box of Wingspan. Maybe not easily, but you can fit them there. And so I wish we had gone with maybe our more obviously recyclable corrugated cardboard, printed but corrugated cardboard boxes to say, hey, just recycle this box and put everything in the core game. Because we set a precedent now, I think it's tough for us to do that with future Wingspan expansions. So maybe we should have set the precedent here with the European expansion. Oceania. I definitely have something about this expansion. And this is not a widely held opinion about Oceania because this expansion, I think, does a fantastic job of addressing something in the core game of Wingspan that players may have struggled with to a certain extent, which is that in the core game, one of the things that you end up doing at the end of the game is just laying eggs. Eggs are worth points, and oftentimes because you have to spend eggs to play more birds, even though you want to do the fun thing of playing more birds, the game kind of tells you probably at this point in the game you should probably just lay some eggs and get some points. Wingspan Oceania counters that with a new side of the board that completely addresses that strategy. However, and this is the twist, it also adds nectar. And nectar, I generally do not play with nectar. I rarely play with nectar. A lot of people like nectar. What nectar is a wild resource, but it is confused. In my opinion, it is confusingly wild in that it is wild in some ways and not in other ways. And as I'm talking about it, I can never even remember all the different ways that it is or isn't wild. Like, does it apply to the any food icon? Does it always apply to any food that you see? There's certain circumstances where it isn't wild and certain circumstances where it is wild. And I wish it was, and I think oftentimes it's like when you have a bird or an ability that says, if you use a rodent token, if you have an any fish or any food token, that it does or doesn't apply. I think it's a little bit confusing. I wouldn't even say it's inconsistent, but it ends up being a little confusing and obviously hard for me to remember. So I don't know. I think I probably would have tried to make nectar, maybe make it either consistently wild for all of those situations, or design it a little bit differently. But I know a lot of people disagree with me on this, and that is totally fine because I think a lot of people love nectar. Also, I have heard from a lot of people that nectar devalues the other food tokens quite a bit, and they often end up playing with 2 or 3 nectar dice and then 2 regular dice. And I think that is something that maybe we should have considered a little bit. I think if you make something wild and you make it too abundant, then it does devalue the other specific food tokens in the game. But overall, I think the player mat and the birds and the end of game abilities and the more stuff elements of this expansion were very successful. Last, we have Wingspan Asia, which is also a standalone game for 1 to 2 players. And actually, here's a better, well, this image does it. This expansion is geared around the idea of saying, hey, you want to play bird cards? We're going to make that extra fun because whenever you play a bird card, you also get to put a token on this shared board if you're dueling with another player. I think this expansion is an incredible feat because it's a standalone game for 1 to 2 players. It also can expand a game of Wingspan to 6 or 7 players using the flock mode. It also just adds a bunch of new birds to the game. And I believe it has more bonus cards, maybe more bonus tiles as well. Although the bonus tiles in this game are geared specifically towards the map. And I think maybe this is my one. Actually, no. I have maybe 2 regrets for this expansion. One is that we didn't also add gold tiles that can just be used in a regular game of Wingspan. And two, it was a big decision, and this was a decision that I made with Elizabeth, but I think ultimately I made the decision for the shape of the tokens that you place on the map. The idea behind the shape, it's a kind of a yin and yang shape, partially thematic for it being an Asian themed expansion, partially because I wanted to use a shape where you could see the icon. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. Not really. Zoom. Oh, there we go. Where you can see the icon underneath it, because you need to see the icons for the goals that are underneath. And I think the problem is we didn't really design the shape and or the spaces on the board well enough so that you actually can see them. The tokens are a little bit too tall, and really I think we could have just redesigned the shape of the circles so that the yin and yang curls around it really nicely. Also, one question I did pose to Elizabeth at a certain point is, if we are including these tokens, should we give some sort of meaning to or let players play the white token kind of wrapped around the black token, so to form that yin and yang icon? Should we have that mean something, or give players a way to do that? And we couldn't find a way to make it work, but I think that is intuitive for players to want to combine those two tokens, and maybe we should have designed around that a little bit more. All right, a few more to go here. Thank you for bearing with me on this longer video. We have Tapestry, Plans, and Ploys. This is a game largely geared around making the combat mechanism in Tapestry a little bit more meaningful, a little bit more mischievous. And I think that the expansion accomplishes that goal pretty well. So it has all these cards that you can play when an opponent tries to attack you, tries to conquer your territory, or tries to play a trap against you. It's this mind game that you're playing with the other players. It is largely a more stuff expansion where it adds new factions, new landmarks, new ways to get landmarks. I'm trying to think if there's anything really that I don't use about this expansion or don't enjoy about this expansion. And maybe if anything, at this point, I was still struggling a little bit to balance the factions as well as we possibly could, even though I knew at this point that we were actively using data analysis to balance these factions really well, but we still hadn't quite accomplished that goal. So maybe that is my one regret from this expansion. That brings us to, I think, what we would consider the most successful expansion. Let's see which one has more ratings. Plans and Ploys still has more ratings, but Arts and Architecture is the Tuscany for Viticulture as this expansion is for Tapestry, because it adds a whole new track that you can advance on, the Arts and Architecture track. This definitely adds complexity to the game. It is a whole other track to consider. So it's in a game where you only have 4 choices on any of your turns, this adds a 5th choice. That is a big addition in the decision space, but it's a pretty satisfying decision at that. The one thing maybe that I struggle with when remembering and teaching this expansion is related to where's a good photo of them? It's related to these. Oh, no, I'm not going to find these cards. So it's related to a certain type of card in the game that you gain on the arts track that gives you some abilities at certain times, and I can never quite remember exactly when these cards are triggered. We can see them. I don't know. They're these square cards, and like right now, I should be able to remember for our own game. I should be able to remember exactly when these cards trigger. I think it's the beginning of your income step, but I can't remember if it's all of them or only some of them. Maybe we could have made that a little bit clearer. But overall, I think this is a very well-regarded expansion. There isn't much that I'd change about it. I don't always personally play with the arts track myself because it does make Tapestry a heavier and even longer game at times. But I do like that it exists. And then last, we have Tapestry's Fantasies and Futures, our science fiction / fantasy version of the game. And this one adds a lot of new stuff. It adds new landmarks. It adds new factions, new cards, new capital city mats, new technologies. It's a pretty robust expansion. How do I want to say this? Because it is not an expansion that you can just seamlessly shuffle everything in. You do shuffle everything in, but there are additional rules to understand. You can see like the text on this tech card. There's a lot of text there because it has a pretty big thing that you need to remember about that tech card. Also, and I think this is a really cool mechanism, but again, it's one that I struggle to remember exactly how it works a little bit. On the cards, let's see if I can find a better picture. There are certain Tapestry cards in the game that, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to find a photo of them. There's certain Tapestry cards in the game that have tags to the left and the right, and the timing of exactly when those tags activate, I don't always remember. I don't always remember. I think it's when you link another card to it, but that card doesn't have to have a tag there. It's just if you play a card there. Just one of those little things that maybe we could have made a little graphically easier to remember in Fantasies and Futures. We have 2 more here. Expeditions Gears of Corruption. This is both a more stuff expansion and a let's fix some stuff about the core game. I think maybe my one regret about this expansion, because I think I really love what this expansion adds, especially in terms of the dual layered mats, the hero workers that you start out with. So you start out with a worker right at the beginning. You start off with some guile and power. It gives you, it accelerates the beginning of the game quite a bit and gives you a lot more freedom at the beginning of the game. I think my main regret is that I didn't figure out some of those things for the core game of Expeditions, that I didn't have the hero workers, that I couldn't figure out how to make these dual layered mats work. I really did try. I couldn't figure them out at the time. Yeah, I think that's my regret. This stuff isn't in the core game. And no, that is not it. So even though I had that regret, I think it still is viable standalone. And I think not standalone, but as an expansion, and that we don't plan on redoing Expeditions just to add this stuff. I think both complement each other. It would increase the cost of Expeditions, and Expeditions is already a pretty expensive game. So we're not planning to combine them. And last, we have Apiary expanding the Hive, our newest expansion. This is for Apiary. It is also largely a more stuff expansion. Here's a big photo that shows all these new Hive mats that we can add. There's a bunch of new tiles that you can add, new seed cards. And yeah, I have a somewhat of an embarrassing regret. And again, it's related more to the core game than the expansion itself, because I love everything this expansion adds. It's really easy just to add everything in and play with the expansion. The embarrassing thing that I have to say about the seed cards is that you'll notice in the core game of Apiary, the art for all the seed cards is the same. And when we went back to the artist, Quanchai, for the expansion, and we said, hey, we got some more seed cards. It'd be great if this time maybe we could have different art for each of the seed cards. Quanchai said, yeah, you know, I was always wondering why you didn't use my seed card art for the core game. And I was like, what? I didn't say, what are you talking about? But in my head, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, we only had the one illustration. And I went back and looked, and the art was in a folder. I don't even know. I can't even fully explain it. But basically, Quanchai had created art for every different seed card in the core game, and we just missed it when we were putting together the game of Apiary. And so fortunately, we had all this art that we could use for the expansion, but it was just one of those moments where I was like, why did I not know this? Why did I not see this or use it or ask the question of why do we only have one illustration for all seed cards? Yeah, that's entirely on me. So that is my embarrassing regret for the last expansion here, Apiary expanding the Hive. I think that's it. I think those are all our expansions. Lots of embarrassing things to admit here about the decisions that I made, things that I missed. But overall, like, a lot of people worked on these expansions to make them beautiful and make them hopefully to add joy to your tabletop, and hopefully they've accomplished that goal. And hopefully this gave you some insight into the design and product design process that we go through when making an expansion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have things to add in the comments below, it might sting a little if some things that you think I should regret about these expansions, but yeah, maybe be nice about it, but let me know what you would change about any of these expansions so I can learn from your experiences as well. All right, thanks.